Open me hills to country. To educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah. Focus on Liberia. For Liberia, Liberia. For Liberia, yeah, 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 yeah. From Monday to Sunday. From Monday to Sunday, it's focused on Liberia. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, foreign affairs, reliable information. Talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday. Focus on
It is we. It's okay. I think we're on. Yes, yes. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Liberian Scholar Hour, the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Hour. And we'll give you a few minutes to share the show, and then we will begin. So I will start the jingle.
My name is Abina Johnson, and this is Focus on Liberia. Hit it! From Cape Mount to Cape Palmer, Mount Nimba to Atlantic Ocean, open me hills to country. To educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah. Focus on Liberia. For Liberia, Liberia. For Liberia, yeah, 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 yeah. From Monday to Sunday. From Monday to Sunday. It's focused on Liberia. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, foreign affairs, reliable information, history, talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Hour. Today, we will be discussing the crew again, and our guest is Dr. Jeffrey Gunn. But before we start, hi, Jeff.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you. We are having some issues on Facebook, and that's why there was a delay because we're trying to share it, and there was a delay in sharing. It's on YouTube, but hopefully they will be able to fix that. So as we always say when we come to the Liberian Studies Association, we're having our 56th annual conference in Baltimore, Maryland at Morgan State University from April 24th to the 26th. So please join us for that. And a few weeks ago, we had Megan Kusha, well, Dr. Megan Kusha and Kweku Dankwa on the Liberian Studies Association hour for a discussion about the crew. Megan did an amazing defense. I didn't know she spoke crew, but she ended it with crew. And today, it is our pleasure and honor to have Dr. Gunn. Dr. Jeffrey Gunn is a musician, an author, educator, and historian. He is a professor of African history, maritime history, among others. And his research comes from a place of experience, music, and history. And I guess I was listening to you, Dr. Gunn, and you said you want to understand why the world is as it is. So I think you will tell us a little bit about that, and allow me to put your bio in the chat so that those who want to learn more about Dr. Gunn can go to this website. It's actually YouTube, and also get some good music.
Thank you.
Yes, so we'll go in the chat room, comments, and there we go. And I'll paste it, and there. Okay, I'm sure it will come. Okay, so so we're going to be discussing this book. I hope all of you purchase this book, because as we said, we don't want you coming here cutting pieces of Wikipedia and pasting it here. Get the book, read the book. I've been posting the book on my Facebook. Get the book. It's right here. Buy it. And then if you can't buy it, you got it in the library, read it, but buy it. You need a copy of this book. This is a comprehensive diaspora framework for the analysis of the migration of the crew workers in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans. So, Dr. Gunn, as I said, welcome. How did you get interested? Well, I know you're in history, but how did you get interested in the crew? Did you just in your research, can you tell us how you got interested in the history of wages and the crew and the people along the coast?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I basically had traveled through Africa in my 20s, and I'm also a musician, so I kind of listened to like some palm wine music, and I was interested in how the crew played a role in kind of the music they created and went all around like West Africa and how they played a role in that. And I was looking for something to write about in my studies in the PhD, and my mentor gave me a book by George Brooks that was kind of like the first kind of major work on the crew. There had been previous ones, but that was kind of the first one that looked at their work in the Atlantic world. And so after reading that, I had worked at sea myself. I had worked on ships for about 5 years of sea time in my 20s, sailing all over the world. And I wouldn't compare my experience as a musician to the labor that they had to do on the ships at all. But I knew what it was like to live at sea. And so when I came across this book, it immediately spoke to me. I was just amazed by the sheer breadth of the crew experience. You know, they turned up all over the Atlantic world and throughout West Africa and in the Caribbean. And then also, as I dove more into it, I was interested in what their experiences in the Indian Ocean world too. You know, Zanzibar and India and the Middle East and as far away as Hong Kong and the experiences there. So it really I wanted to write about their experiences and research about their experiences in various places, and kind of take off and look at everything that had been done and kind of add to it. And what I tried to do in the book was really just put together everything that had ever been written about the crew, all the major works, and also beyond that too. It was really important to me to interview crew, community members. So when I went to Freetown, I met the Chief Davis, who was the head of Crewtown, and through him, I also met a lot of other crew people living in Freetown and Sierra Leone. And then I went to Monrovia, and I met the crew governor and about maybe 10 or 15 different officials who were there at the same time I was there. So I got to interview them all and ask them questions about history. So I include oral histories in the book as well too, and that was very important to me, to talk to crew people and and see how they viewed their own history. And then also put that with with all the different sources that I used when I was writing the book. You know, everything from paintings in the 1700s to exploring maps with names, with the name Crow on the actual map, and how that figured into their identity, and also to wage lists. I also, to answer the second part of your question, I was interested in doing wage labor because there's so many people writing on different aspects of the Atlantic world, and I was interested in particular in the history of wage labor and how the crew working on the ships and in other environments, how it's a very, we might say, unique history in the Atlantic world, and how I could contribute something and share the story of the crew in a way that had maybe not been done previously, in a way that added to all the previous people who'd written about it. And also, one other thing I might add too, sorry, I'm having all these ideas come to me right now.
Oh, it's okay.
One of the crew, there was a Reverend Gibson that I met in a Tugby Warlow, who wrote, Tugby wrote his own history of the crew, and I included that work also into my own studies as well. So it was very important to me to give crew voice as well too. In a lot of ways, I just feel honored to be the person that got to, you know, pull all these different sources together and traveled to South America and Europe and Africa and a lot of the places where the crew, even in Singapore where the crew stayed for a time, and been to a lot of these places, and to have gone there and then to interview crew people as well too, talking about their own histories. All these things kind of factored into the reason why I wanted to write about it. And as I got more into it, I got more excited about it. And I thought that it's to me a very unique history. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody is asking, what's the title of the book? It's called Outsourcing African Labor. Outsourcing African Labor. It's here. It's crew migratory workers in global ports, estates, and battlefields until the end of the 19th century. So I like the way you structure the book, because, you know, it's like, here is the beginning when they were on their surf boats or their surfboards, and then to take us through this evolution, you know, of their importance, and then all the way back until the Liberian government stepped in. But so as I said, I took a course in mobility and migration, and one of the quotes that Conrad in his global history wrote, and I just want to read it. He says, once we understand the longevity and extent of these interactions, right, it becomes harder to trample on or dismiss the values of others, because we can more clearly see that we share the basic predicament of what Aaron called the human conditions. So we migrate, and I was reading the book and thinking about the diasporic migration from Africa. These were the first, you know, based on their work. So let's start with each stage as the hallmark of continuity and transformation. I made notes because I read. Okay. So chapter 1 is the beginning with their identity and the surf boats. But tell me, we talk in the book, you talk about they serve as lookouts, and they I was laughing at this one. You said that they had a dual role. They were helping Cuban slave traders at the same time helping the Royal Navy.
Right.
So I guess for them, it was just commerce, right? It was just to make a living.
I think it was commerce, and I think it raises some questions too as to, you know, what positioned the crew to become traders with a lot of different European groups like the British and the Portuguese and others. And Peter Gutkind basically wrote about how the natural environment, the surf, was really hard to land in the subsea terrain, and that positioned the crew to become more like traders rather than form the mass amount of enslaved people, you could say. So I think that put them in a position to become like traders, basically, through what I found. I also, just to kind of explain, I also used a lot of different sources in different languages, in French and Spanish and English, and also different types of sources. I think one thing I discovered when I was putting together, and particularly that early era you're talking about in the first chapter, I try to answer all the questions that have not been answered yet about the crew, all the previous scholarship that had written about it and people that had opinions on it. I tried to answer all those questions, like how far back did they actually trade with Europeans? What was the and how we could actually go about discovering that? What's the root of the headman? And how did they
Yes.
get that position? And a lot of questions that had been posed, in the previous decades. So I tried to answer all of them to the best of the ability I possibly could, through garnering everything from interviews to early ship records to maps. Early maps from the 15 and 1600s were very useful because they would name towns like Crewe and Crua, and before the crew were even serving as crew members on ships. So it kind of showed that there was a long history there, and also that even the word surfboat, I use it. I know canoe is a word that's used often.
Yeah.
Of course. But I just used it to kind of say that because of the terrain, the seas, the currents. I used a term from a nautical dictionary that preferred to use the word surfboat. So in my own writings, I use surfboat. But I know that canoe is widely used too, and so is surf canoe more recently. A really recent publication that just came out literally a few weeks ago by Kevin Dawson used the word surf canoe. So as a function of traversing the tides and the huge waves off the coast and the subsea terrain. That's why I use that word, just to clarify too, and kind of come back to that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of straying away a little bit from your question.
No,
But
no. It's yeah. Coming to the headman. The headman. It was very interesting that the crew that they had a book, right? That this
right.
recommendation that they would show this book, and that this headman was actually the one who would, I guess, be the one to maintain discipline and to find a work for them. But it was interesting that they also give some remuneration to them. They pay the headman,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah, they
and
paid him as well. Yeah.
I found what I think the biggest find that I found in my work was these pay lists from 1819, very early pay lists that show how much each crew member, each crew member on the ship was paid, and it was different for headmen. Headmen got paid more, and because of based on experience, as you mentioned, the book. They would have like basically they called it a book, but it was like a sheet of paper that recommendation letter from previous captains that enabled them to kind of continue on to work and to get higher wages, say, than their co-parts, so the labor force that they assembled, right? Also, to remember, they were working on lots of different types of ships. They were on merchant ships, they're on Royal Navy ships, and that's really where you see the solidification of their wages. Is through these wages, these different lists that are still you can find in the archives. I believe the ones that I used that are kind of the core of the book, they had been mentioned before, but no one had ever really analyzed them in the form of an article or book. So that's really formed the kind of, I would say, the foundation for everything that comes in the book, or it might be the one major part of the book that kind of holds the whole outsourcing wage labor thing together. I'm going to circle back to the first question you asked, though, about how they were working on Royal Navy ships in pursuit of abolishing the slave trades, but also at the same time working on slave ships. Yeah. So to kind of circle back to that question, yeah, it seems that I kind of think that my own personal belief is maybe because that was a way to survive. It wasn't it wasn't pretty, but it was also a way for them to
Yes.
survive and
Yes.
avoid colonization, avoid capital, British colonials, all kinds of different things that were kind of encroaching on them later in the 1800s, right? It was a way for them to maintain that freedom, and so I think that it's I try to show all the different aspects in the book. Although I mostly concentrate on wage labor, I do touch on that just to show, because the sources are out there, and the conversations, even the people that I interviewed would acknowledge that that part of the history and the oral histories. But I'll say that I found the oral histories to be very telling too, because you could get a lot of information that kind of for example, crew women. The wife of the headman would often be the person in charge of the younger crew members, as they were waiting in Freetown to go out and go on different ship contacts, it would be an opportunity for they would have to answer to her. So she had some authority, and you could never get that if it wasn't for me interviewing, for example, a gentleman named Doe Smith in Freetown, whose father was a headman. When I interviewed him in 2012, he was 90 years old, which means, and his father was actually a headman that worked on ships in the 1800s. If you do the math, the father would have worked in the late 1800s as a headman. So he shared a lot of stories about his father's experiences that are passed down to him, that I then was able to put in the book as well too. And one was about the role of women in the diasporic community in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and how women played a very important role in maintaining discipline and order in the household, if you will. So I found little gems like that quite interesting. And I tend to, I see the crew personally through what I've discovered in the sources is just as people who are very strong and survive and did what they had to do, so to speak, in order to maintain autonomy, in throughout history. And also too, just to be careful, I'll say that it's very easy to find a lot of material on the crew after 1792. After Freetown is established, there's a lot of material on the crew, but you have to use a lot of different types of sources, everything from postcards to maps to paintings to graveyards to shipping records to wage lists, whole bunch of different things, to oral histories, right? Estate records, all these different things. You have to use it if you really want to get the full picture of the story, as far as I'm concerned. But before that, it was I did have to work very hard to try to find sources like in the 1600s and the earlier 1700s, but they're out there, and I put them in the book. And I hope that you mentioned earlier Dr. Kutcher and Kweku as well too, who I know both of them, and very proud of the work they're doing as well too, and kind of carrying on. I'm a little bit older than them, so they're a bit younger, and they're kind of taking on. We did a panel last year with the Liberian Studies Association, which was just wonderful because I'd never been on a panel with other people who were just doing the crew. So that was just incredible to experience that and to see the amazing work that they're doing and the places they're taking, So, yeah.
Yeah. So after the surfboards, we come to the Freetown, which is the diasporic beginnings, right? That's when they started to branch out to go, and then I took a little comparison from from one of the tables that in 1793 there were 15, I think, in Sierra Leone, right, in the town, and then by 1826 there was 1,100 of them,
right?
And I was like, whoa, but I found it interesting that you mentioned that they would work between 6 to 18 months to send money back home, but I guess because of the proximity they went home. At this point they weren't like, we're going and never returning. They returned home after and they sent remittances. How did they send the remittances?
Right.
So when they would go home, would it be the headman that would tell them to come back, or how would they know to return? Or is it that it was cyclical? Every 6 to 18 months they have to return.
Yes, it was cyclical for sure. A lot of times too, as the 19th century progressed, some would just decide, well, first of all, let me just give a little bit of context. Yeah, right. The population exploded after the Royal Navy was based for the abolition of the slave trades after 1808 is when the first ships arrived from the British Royal Navy, and they started hiring crew. And that's when the population actually expanded quite a bit in correlation to that. And they formed Crewtown, and Crewtown itself, the different street names are named after, like Little Crew, Grand Cess. They're named after different places along the Crew Coast, and the different street names and different communities would be affiliated and associated with those different streets. So they had where the crew languages was spoken, crew culture was maintained in that diasporic community in Freetown. And then, like you said, they would finish their 3 months, 6 month, 18-month contract, and they would either, in a lot of cases, at least in the beginning, it seemed that they would cycle between Freetown and their hometown villages on the Liberian coast and Crew Coast, and basically then go back after a certain amount of time, and maybe after several months, and then go back and do the next contract over the period of a lifetime. An adolescent boy might get picked in his early teens to go work be part of a labor gang, and then work either shoreside projects or ship projects, right? And then return and do it again until they eventually became a headman one day themselves. That whole cycle of labor, right? As you said, Freetown was the first, arguably the first, diasporic community, outside, which then became a springboard for other diasporic communities. Crew towns sprung up in places like, as Ascension Island, Fernando Po, even Simonstown, South Africa, and they became a network where you could work and live in these different places. But what happened over the course of the century was that some people decided not to go home as much and maybe just remain in these communities, right? And so, even to this day, if you go to Freetown, there's a very strong, large, sizable crew town in Freetown, Sierra Leone. And then, of course, the other ones that I talk about in the book are also like in Monrovia as well too, which I've been to, the crew town there, new crew town, and the crew town. There was two at one time. But going there, that's why I did a lot of the interviews for the oral histories about the crew, which was a great experience. And I'll just say that cycle, depending on what type of contract you got, if you were in the Royal Navy, if you're a crew that got that contract, you could be in there for 3-year period in which you do numerous contracts. The 6 shipping records that I have, the wage lists from the 1819, 1820, basically have durations of like 3 months, 6 months, different lengths of contracts in those wage lists. And my goal is to find even more. You know what I mean? Those are kind of the quintessential ones that show rather early that there was this cycle, as you said, of cycling back and forth and sending remittance home and then going home and then coming back and doing it all over again. And then, that's what really struck me, that when I was first reading about the crew, I was like, wow, these guys were really mobile and they were working and just traveling out everywhere. And they had so many different types of jobs, to everything, from just shipping cargo back and forth in Freetown, to engaging in shipboard activities, everything from removing barnacles on the bottom of the ship to watering, getting fresh water when you docked in different places, to, using the language, speaking the language down the coast too, the lingua franca, English down the coast. It's amazing.
That made me laugh, Dr. Gunn, because when I was reading the book, there's a place where you said that they learn like some colloquial or pieces. They put Portuguese and English and things together. Right. And it reminded me of there was a talk one time about vernacular, which is the language in the mines in South Africa. Right. It's a hybrid Zulu and Afrikaans. Right. And it comes together and most of it is just instructional. It's not conversational. It's right. Like, do this, come here, do right. that, Right. Yeah. So I am in reading the book, I am really amazed at how this group of people use something that they know well to right. further themselves, and further the group. But it's like, okay, you're seafarers, so what? But they took it among themselves to say, you know what? Yeah, we are seafarers, and these people need our expertise.
Right.
So we are going to set ourselves apart. We are free men. We are not like these enslaved people on the ship. So we have our book. We are paid wages, and even I was struck by not only were they so important to the British Army, to the British Navy, that when they were going to the Pacific on a Nemesis, they took them.
Right.
They took the crew to the Pacific, not just on our shores. Right. They were like, you're too valuable, because I remember Kweku said that when they went to, I think it was Georgetown, they went to Ascension Island. They were in the hospital. They went to the government hospital to be treated. Unlike the other people, the crew people were valued.
Yes,
because of their skills. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you could say that a lot of the operations depended on the crew, their abilities. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the surf off the coast there. It was difficult to get to the shore. So the mastery of the sea really played a huge role. And as they were based in Freetown and then went down to Simonstown and then into the Indian Ocean world, into as far away as, say, Hong Kong. A lot of it boiled down to their great seaman skills, basically, right? And as seafarers. And I think, like, in the history of seafaring, they're definitely one of the most, valued and unique, peoples, for sure, from what I can tell, anyways. But so that's the thing. You're always surprised as you do more research and find out more about the crew. There's just one surprise after another. Like, the crew were so ingrained, as seafarers, even in the minds of, like, Charles Dickens wrote about a crewman, in the Victorian literature in England. And there's about 5 different sources I use that talk about the crew that the British public would have read about in 1800s. So they're almost becoming, a figure in the public consciousness, certainly with seafaring and things like that. I'll say that the crew also, play lots of different roles. They could play a military role. They could play a watering role on expeditions. They demanded, later on in the 1800s, they would demand advances. They wouldn't work unless, they were paid in advance. So, I mean, this system was, and that's why I really call it outsourcing labor. Now, outsourcing African labor, because there's 2 ways you can look at it. One is from the crew perspective, that they're outsourcing their labor, right? And they're working and they're making their own money, and it's very empowering, I think. And also outsourcing as a practice has become very popular in the 20 and 21st century around the world too. There's kind of 2 ways that you can look at that, for the title, that is. And I think that it also speaks to the many diverse roles that the crew played. Not to mention that you were saying earlier about the spreading of the different languages, right? But also the music, like, they played a major role in the dissemination of palm wine guitar, and, like, going to different ports, and the kind of music that was developed, and guitar styles. And I'm increasingly interested in that, being a musician myself, and having played with a lot of different African musicians as well throughout my career. And I had wonderful experiences in that realm as well. I'm interested in how knowledge, spreads, and like you said, the vital role the crew have played in that.
Yeah, here's a picture. Well, I don't know how to show it because of copyright, but there's one 1775. They have.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
No, I said in your book you have a picture of 3 crewmen.
Yeah.
1775.
Yes.
I mean, that was a long, long time ago. For those asking, I will show you the book again. This is Outsourcing. And the reason why you see there's a barcode there is because this one is the book from Cornell Library, because one of my friends took the other one. I have a crew friend who took the one that I ordered. But this is the book, Outsourcing African Labor, Crew Migratory Workers in Global Ports, Estates, and Battlefields until the end of the 19th century. Another aspect of the book that I didn't know is that when the British took them to the Caribbean because they needed workers in the plantation, the crew people said, this is not us. Right. They rejected working in the plantations because for them they're seafarers. They didn't want plantation work. But some of them remain, right? Some of them remain in the Caribbean.
What I'll say about that is, so when I did the book, I was looking at their experience that I could find in Africa, and then on the diasporic communities circulating all over on the ships. And then one chapter is dedicated to their work in the Caribbean. I went there personally to Trinidad and Guyana and Jamaica. What I'll say is that there, even within that context, you had the formation of a crew town in Trinidad. It wasn't on the same scale as those in West Africa, but it was certainly that's where the workers would work. And again, they got paid wages. They were not indentured laborers. They had freedom of movement. They could boycott or move from place to place if they're not happy. They were also, unlike, say, the emancipated or the Indian and Chinese laborers, they occupied their own space. And a lot of them too. Some of them did agricultural labor. They were paid for that. But then they also, it seems, en masse really returned to their kind of seafaring skills in moving cargo and stuff like that from ship to shore and the state to ship and all that. And they seem to like to work the rivers and from what I could tell in the sources and things like that. And they did have a unique identity there. Even in Guyana, there was a time where the crew in 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up, and eventually they had a unique identity, and eventually they intermarried. And this is the other thing that happened. Whereas before you would have to, if you were a worker, you would give a cut to the headman, right? They would take a cut and then they would give it to the Krogba as well, would take a cut as well back in the day. I'll say that in the context of the Caribbean, there came a time where you no longer really had to do that. You could buy your own land. You could purchase your own land. It was offered in the context of Trinidad and Guyana, which was unique from West Africa. So some people see that as being how they, kind of amalgamated into Guyanese, society. And today it was hard for me to find. I found a lot of the documents in the archives in Guyana relating to the crew, but I didn't find many people who identified as crew. I couldn't do interviews like I could in, say, Sierra Leone and Liberia and Ghana as well. I went to Ghana and did some interviews there as well. Nor in Trinidad. It was like a memory of the crew, that had kind of been there. I'd like to go back though to Trinidad and those places and see if I could find any descendants to interview at some point. But during the time I had there, the minimal time I had, just a period of like a month or something, I had to move quickly to kind of get this stuff done, but I would like to go back and see if it'd be possible to do that.
Yeah, I remember you said that there are 89 people who are buried in Simonstown, crew people, looking at death records and things like that. I mean,
Right.
the wealth of information, when you start digging, it just leads you to another place. I get lost in the repository. When I'm reading, I'm like, oh my Lord, oh my Lord, so when as it waned and the Liberian government became more intrusive into the affairs of the crew, right? They felt like the crew did not have allegiance to them, and the crew saw themselves as autonomous agents. They were not here to listen to what you have to say.
Right.
But I was struck by the fact that J.J. Roberts and the others, it's almost like they were trying to punish the crew for being so independent.
Right.
In your book, you talk about even to live in Monrovia, they say they should pay tax $150,
Right.
and then they should get a certificate $150 to work.
Right.
So they were taxing them to work when some of them didn't have money. Why? I mean, well, we know that it was to make them subservient, but were they also did they think that they had a lot of money? Why were they taxing them and not other groups?
I think that there's an ordinance in 1835 that came out that, like, as you said, you had to pay the tax, and you also had to have a certificate to work in Monrovia if you were crew at the time. That was the idea. And I think it's because they were so valued, as we talked about earlier, on the different ships. They had a reputation, for kind of going down the West African coast. There was a piece in the New York Times that spoke about every cruiser should have a seafarer on it. Basically, that's how valuable they were. And I just want to say too that they were seen as producing a lot of income. I think they had the port. The taxes were, if you wanted to work out of a certain port, you had to give a certain cut. If you were the headman, you have to give a certain cut of your pay to the port authorities, right? So in the government, essentially. So I think it was about controlling the labor, right, and trying to profit off that. That seems to be the big thing. And what happened was a couple of things. One was that it kind of led to some of these crew towns receiving more people. People seem to go abroad to work even more. My book is really only up to 1900. I don't really. I see some of the comments here too asking about present day. I don't really want to comment on that because I didn't really focus on present day circumstances. My work is basically from like 1400s up to 1900 in this book, anyways. Maybe in the future, but not now. So I want to limit it to what I researched basically. But I will say that I just want to circle back to one thing too. You said about the graves, right? So the graves also have a lot of information about what ships the crew worked on, like in the Atlantic world, but all over the Indian Ocean world too. And also the gravesite in Zanzibar, you know, in Tanzania,
Yeah.
there was the graves that were found there too of crews. So, and it tells like all these sources give information on what ships they're working on and how old they were, you know, and it provides the grave sites themselves in South Africa and other places gives so much information about the crew. And I think it really proves, you know, how wide the scale of the crew diaspora was, you know, during this time period. And, you know, it really was truly global. If you know, we're talking one moment about their
Yes.
work in Trinidad and their work in, you know, Guyana, and then they're suddenly have a grave site with, you know, in Tanzania, and also, you know, it's just unbelievable. You know, I hope my second project that I really like to do is see what happened, their involvement in World War I and World War II in the 20th century, kind of bring it up to par. I'd like to do that if I have the time at some point in my life. But I'll say that, you know, looking at the scale of it, looking at what they did, and then the struggles they had, you know, as you mentioned, you know, being taxed, whatever. I think it was because they were seen as being so valuable, and they would, you know, ask for advances, and they're involved in everything from expeditions to, you know, military campaigns to, you know, the abolition of the slave trade in the Indian Ocean world too. You know, they received medals. It's in the book as well too. Some of them received medals for their services, you know, in the Indian Ocean world, and those who would have been enslaved in the Middle East, and you know, basically, you know, seizing the ships of those people that were destined for places like Oman and so, you know, Saudi, the Gulf, Persian Gulf. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the fact is that all of the quotes that you have in it, and all of the other ones I've read, um, the British have nothing but good things to say about the prowess on the ocean. You know, they call them hardworking.
Yes,
They call them industrious. You know, some they are in awe of of how they can navigate the seas. You
right,
know, so I mean, despite the fact that, yeah, there were some of them who were porters and other things, the fact that their knowledge controls the ocean, they know how to navigate it, was probably one of the things that well, it was the most important thing. But the British, all of the quotes I'm reading in the book, they're like, who are these people?
yeah,
You know, that can really do this without the navigational equipment that we have. Who are these people? You
right,
know?
right.
Yeah, it was
I think that it's also one of those things that they really did depend on them. You know, they depended on that local knowledge to do a lot of things. And I also don't want to sugarcoat it. And, you know, were they treated as equals? Well, in the book, I talk about how a headman would be like ranked as 8th class, or the second headman would be like 9th
yes.
class. So there was a system. They were not, you know, I don't want to also create the impression they were treated as equals, because
No, 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 no,
there was
no.
definitely discrimination, and, you know, it was definitely an unfair system. It was definitely not equal. But I'll just say, given the circumstances, to me, it's pretty remarkable how they fared, you know, compared to a lot of others. Even in shipping records, they were designated their own category. Crewmen, you would have on a lot of the muster lists rather, that would, for example, going to British Guyana, Monica Schuler provided in the 1980s. She looked at this, and I also include some of her work and reference some of her work in mine too. How they were allotted their own category, you know, and so that does show they were unique, you know, compared to other African ethnicities that were just kind of grouped into one. You had the crew that had their own.
Yes.
I think it also shows, you know, how much, like, again, how much they were valued for their labor, you know, and how they would, you know, be able to get things done, if you, so to speak, you know. A lot of times too, navigating the, you know, rivers and stuff, they were used for navigating, you know, river systems and also coastal systems, so you wouldn't, you know, piloting ships and things like that, you know, obviously the ship depended on that, getting fresh water supplies, you know, everything from that to, you know, being in naval brigades, you know, in southern Africa and what is now Nigeria. Also engaged in the palm, besides the Royal Navy, palm industry, you know, and engaged in transporting that from ship, you know, from shore to ship, and so to speak. And that's actually one of the references too in some of the literature. It talks about them in the palm oil industry as well too. So it was, you know, it's just so far ranging, you know, and just remarkable.
There's one, I don't know if Megan spoke about it, but there was one where the one of the British, I guess, captains wanted to buy something, and the crew insisted that he come on shore, that that this chief was not going to go on his boat. He must come on shore. And
Right.
he wrote about that, that this guy commanded, his presence was commanding, and he made him come on shore to negotiate with him. And he negotiated so well that the British guy said, I think I lost. I think that I didn't get a good price.
Right.
So it's very interesting that, given the fact that um sometimes they would work against the Liberian government, because they are saying, we're not subject to you, and the British, depending on how they want to use them, will say, of course, these people are part of, us, not, they're independent trade workers. But JJ Roberts, in the book, you say that the crew, they were according to JJ Roberts and the others, that they were difficult to Christianize. So JJ Roberts started bringing Christian missionaries and churches within the crew, right?
Right.
But it seemed to me that after a while, I guess after the wane of the army, the military, that a lot of them were Christianized,
Yes.
because there's, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you see that in the mid 1800s. Before that, there seemed to be a bit of resistance to it.
Yes.
It was kind of like that relationship. Like, we're gonna get paid for our labor, whether it's in kind or monetary wages at the time. We're gonna earn money, but also too, you can't get too close to us. Like, we're gonna keep our own beliefs and our own language and our own world. And I think that was part of it. There was a bit of resistance, but maybe over time, as they worked throughout the 19th century, got closer, perhaps there was more motivation to kind of get into that world. I mean, there's always a cultural exchange in the world between different peoples, right? Like, in the case of the crew, they might get a Navy tattoo, or the Royal Navy, that showed that they
Yeah.
worked in the Royal Navy, as a sense of pride, right? And even, like, the story, just to stray a little bit, the headman, right? Where does that headman come from? Like, and that was one of the big questions in the book too, that I tried to answer. And from what I could tell from early documents from the 1700s and 1600s and so forth, that lead paddler that would come out to meet the ships, that evolved
Wow.
into the headman, and, like, even to add to what you were saying about religion, the taking of an English name, you'd have your crew name, but you'd have the English name as well. It was like a hybrid identity, right? It was, to have that name in the Royal Military, or in the Royal Navy rather, because on the pay list it will list their English names, right? It was also like, it was almost maybe to ease the way that relations were done. You know what I mean? In the business between each other, they would have like a more ease between each other. I don't know. But what I'll say is that the naming thing was a big deal too, because I found these names in the 1819 list, but I also found similar names 100 years earlier that were given to the Krogba's sons that they were trading with, right? So it was almost like a sense of prestige or something, perhaps, to take on that identity when you work in the Royal Navy, and to have your crew name and also maybe an English name or something. Maybe at that time in history, it had an impact, and led to maybe more ease of relations and more contracts and things like that, right? Okay. But I'll say too that the encroaching, as I was saying earlier, the encroaching of different European parties, like the French, coming in what would become Cote d'Ivoire, and then and the Americans and the British, and lots of different parties. The Germans had an interest there too. I'll just say that all of that, I think the crew had to deal with all that, and the best possible way they can, to keep as much autonomy as they possibly could. And I think that's, one of the reasons why their experience was so diverse, working for different groups. And we haven't even talked about the French at all yet, but I'll just say, like, those to the east of the Kavala River, that would actually go and have diaspora communities, right, in other places like French Guiana, and places like in South America, and places like Gabon and Libreville, and those places as well too, where you had your own crew towns there too, that were going back and forth from what is now Cote d'Ivoire, and going there and doing they're also their own cyclical, and then those crew who worked for German factories along the African coast in Namibia and other places like that. they also had this cyclical, it's just amazing when you compare to the British experience and the French, and then those who worked on the American ships too, and were working on ships that were seizing slave ships as well too, for the abolition of slavery as well. Like, so they had a really, diverse experience from what I can tell, through all the sources.
So when you went to the grave sites to look at the tombstones, right? Were they British names that they had, or they had the original crew names?
A lot of them at that time, because they're Christianized too, they would have had an English name.
Okay.
And so I think that's an interesting marker too. But I want to say one thing about the names too. The British were aware of crew names because they put out I mentioned in the book too. I think it's 1833, if memory serves, off the top of my head, that they suggested certain names that a crew person might have, and here's an English name that you can have that corresponds with that. There was like a list put out, so they were aware of those names as well too, the crew names. Yeah.
Okay, so there's well, you answered Emmanuel Jackson. He said, "What are the ramifications outsourcing labor from indigenous land like crew people currently affecting their homeland, Liberia?" And as you say, that question is not yours to answer because your book stopped before then. Prince Conde says, "Good evening, Focus family. I'm following live from Greenville City, Sino County, the home of the native crew Cloud Crowd people. Thank you so much for the topic tonight." Dr. Jeffrey, do you have any future plans to visit the current home of the crew people in Sino County, Liberia?
Yes, I do. I want to go. I want to go and basically return to Liberia. I can't say if it'll be this year or next, but I definitely plan to go there. And I would like to reconnect. When I was in Monrovia, the 2000, it's been a while now. It's 2012 was actually when I was there. I happened to be there when a lot of the leaders from the different communities on the Sinocana and Crew Coast were there. So that's why I got to interview, just by pure chance. I got to interview like 15 of these people. So I have all the names and details still, a lot of them. And I love to go back and reconnect with them in person and really spend more time in that part of the country and do some more work there and make some friendships and share what I know and play some music together too. I'll bring my guitar. And wherever I go, we always play music, whether it's Sierra Leone or I had some concerts this last summer in Ethiopia and Rwanda and also Tanzania and some other places. So a lot of my favorite artists are actually are West African guitarists, and to be honest. And I've worked with an African artist for 15 years from South Sudan. So I have a big musical connection. That's another part of my life besides music. So I would like to, yes, to answer your question the short way, yes, I do plan on going, and I hope to make connections there when I'm there musically and beyond.
Yeah, thank you. And don't try going from Sierra Leone to Monrovia or Liberia again on motorcycle. We read
Yeah, that's right. I took a motorcycle. That's right, from
yeah.
Freetown all the way to Monrovia, and that was quite an adventure. We actually missed the border crossing. We went to, at that time, I don't know if this is still the case, but they shut the border at 6 p.m. And then the kind family took myself and the driver that I was with, the motorcycle, his name was Charles, and we stayed actually with the local family overnight and then continued the next day. I'll never forget that. It was quite an experience.
Yeah. For those of you just joining again, the book is called Outsourcing African Labor, and is a very rich book, detailed research, pictures, tables. Get your copy and read it, especially those of you who are crew. But for a Liberian, please get this book and read. And I pasted the Amazon link in the comments, and then I pasted also Dr. Gunn's bio that you can read it. If you have questions, you can send it to Focus on Liberia, and I'm sure Dr. Gunn will be able to answer. If you are a scholar on crew history, send your comments or your questions to Focus on Liberia at gmail.com, and we'll be able to forward it to Dr. Gunn. Before we start winding down, I wanted to ask you about the British, the French, and did you find research materials in French libraries as well in French naval history as well, or only the British?
That's a very good question. Because my original this is based on my PhD and I turned it into a book. I kind of really just focused on the British sources, and I use a lot of different texts in the book that are French and Spanish and other languages as well too, and maybe use a certain passage from that in there. But to go to the actual archives, yeah, all the ones I went to the ones in they were largely English for sure, because like for example in Guyana, in Georgetown, Guyana, I went to the National Archives of Guyana there. In Trinidad, where else? Let me think. I also some of the universities also keep collections. Even in the United States, in Indiana, Bloomington, I went there too because they have a Liberian collection there too. I went to the national. I also went to, let's see here, the UK, the archives there in Kew in London, in the UK, and also in I did go in Monrovia as well too. But the most valuable thing I got in Liberia was the interviews, I think. And
Yeah.
like I said, it was very, very, very important to me to also, share that voice as much as I possibly could. I think the next project would be, like I said, going and trying to, do a comparative analysis almost of the crew experience. I touch on a little bit in the book, but if I had to keep it, I couldn't, go too far off in it. I'd have to write another one that compared the British experience with the French, with the German, with that. I think that'd be a really exciting adventure to kind of look at each one and see what the similarities and differences were. I will say that it seems, from what I could tell, that they were paid better by the British than most, and that's maybe why they tended to work more with the British than anyone else too. So that might be something. In terms of the sources, I could go online and I could read. Different, newspaper articles from the period, different, court cases, missionary records, whatever, estate records, things like that. And you might find something in different languages for sure. But like I said, I don't think what I realized is you have to use a whole range of sources when you're looking at the crew. And
Yes.
that's what made it so rich. If people take anything away from the book, I hope it gives you a lot of sources for you to use to go do your own experiment and your own research with. And that's really the goal. I'm just trying to share everything I could possibly find that might help others as well. Kind of learn something interesting and maybe use it for their own purposes. Kind of like when I read the Brooks, and then the Barons was the other one. Barons was the Cote d'Ivoire French book. That was a very valuable source. And I think together, I mentioned that in the book too, they're kind of the two sources you want to start with, is Brooks, and also Barons, which is the French. And she looks at the crew that were on the other side of the Kavala River and their work with the French. And it kind of, all the crew speaking peoples in the region, it kind of puts their histories together, and they provide this starting point. And like I said, what I was hoping to do was put all the pieces of everything that's been done in the field into one place, and bring all those sources together in one place, and then also add some new finds as well. Those wage lists were probably the most important find I found, and also I would say postcards were useful because it proved that because it says Crew Town right on it, and it showed pictures of Crew Town in Sierra Leone. It really spoke to that. Grave sites, grave records proved very unique. There was a bunch of sources. The earliest source of the crew mark that I could find, the marking here,
Yes.
was dates to 1830, and the first reference I could find was about 1819. But speaking to crew members in their own remembrance of their own history, talked about that, about the crew mark. The gentleman that I spoke with said about, that they believed it dated back to, at least 1600s, and also the method that they would use. They used charcoal and some dyes sometimes in different incisions. And that was very valuable to me, because you could read a little bit about that in the book, but the way he described it is in there. I definitely included that in there. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Prince says, thank you very much for planning to return to Liberia. I hope to meet with you at your convenience. By God's grace, I'm also interested in obtaining a copy of your book. You are warmly welcome to Cool Land. Your cool name, Baku, means strong man.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do you know anything about the different sections of the crew people? Yeah, I think in the book you listed all the different sections of the different crew, you
Yes,
know. So don't worry, Prince, when he's coming, we'll bring a copy of the book for you.
I
For
might
you. I
say
think Prince is, yeah.
just one thing to add on to that is that one thing I wanted to really try to do. One thing that before the book was written, there was a lot of different sections of crew that were written in articles and books, like the crew in Guyana. There hadn't been much written at Trinidad at all, so I really want to include that. And the work I found on the crewman's village, I think, is quite unique in Trinidad too, to kind of add something new to the field as well, besides these wage lists. But what I wanted to do was also be, not to use one section of crew and then talk about all crew like that. Be very conscious that this group of crew, worked here, and this crew speaking people worked here, and here's the connections between their diaspora communities and their villages where they're from originally, or the sections of Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire where they originally come from, and forge those connections. Certain crew speaking groups were dominant in Guyana, compared to others that you might find, those who went to South Africa and those who served from South Africa into the Indian Ocean world. There's certain different sections of crew speaking peoples that tended to go different places if you look at the composition of those people that were in those locations. Yeah. One last thing to add too, Jackie, is that there's also there's a softcover book that's out now too. That's a lot more isn't as expensive as the other one. So the softcover book came out maybe a year ago. The publisher put it out, so I think it's a lot more accessible for a lot of people. Yeah.
Okay, so please, as Dr. Gon said, get your copy. This book is really rich. You can read it and be like, oh, maybe I can even take on the project of going further with this. But it's a very richly detailed, researched book. So I will urge you to get your own copy and don't give it to your friend. Just keep it for yourself and then buy a friend one.
Thank you.
Yes. And again, this is the Liberian Studies Association Scholar Hour. The 56th annual conference will be at Morgan State University, April 24th to the 26th. And come and meet other historians, come and meet people who are interested in specifically Liberia, but Africa in general, and discuss things that are pertaining to the continent. I want to thank Dr. Gunn for joining us. We know you're very busy, and we hope that one day we'll be able to, you will come to the conference to give us some music.
Oh, yes.
I know Dr. Carr was saying, we want Dr. Gunn to come and play. And every time I would Google, it will be just musician. Then I see historian. I'm like, no, historian first, musician second.
I got multiple worlds, yes.
Yes, but we want to say thank you to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and for shedding light on, things that we knew a little bit about. I learned a lot by reading this book, and I like I said, I urge everybody to get their copy. Thank you for making this a priority. Thank you for looking at it and doing your maritime history. Even if it was African history, you could have done something different, and you said, "Oh, I'm going to focus on the crew," and for that, we are very grateful to you. So thank you very much. Yeah.
It's an absolute honor for me, and coming from a crew person like yourself too, to see how much you like it means the world to me. So it was a real honor to write it and to put it into the universe, and for people to maybe read it and find something that they connect with. So, and thank you to the Liberian Studies Association and everyone for having me today. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, I'm crew. I'm actually Gribble. My great grandmother is from Rocktown.
Wow.
And then and then Plebo. So yes, but yeah, it's the same thing. We're from the same group.
Amazing.
I'm sure there were Gribble people there, but just use that name crew. But there were some Gribble and Bassa people there too.
For sure.
Yes. Thank you very much. And if you we're going to play the closing song, but if you could just stay on for 1 minute after the song,
Absolutely.
I would like to. Yeah. Okay. So thank you all for joining us, and we will close with our song that says we are all Liberians. And as you know, like we always say, whether you are Bassa, whether you're crew, whether you're Gribble, whether you are Bandi, we are all Liberians, and it behoves us to learn our history. So thank you for joining us today. And like we always say, share the show. It's not too late. You got to keep sharing the show. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Hello and welcome to Focus on.
Oops, sorry.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Our